Welcome to this episode of Out of the Best Books, the podcast where we deep dive into classic literature and have conversations about what we've learned and discovered along the way. We love all things books and reading, and we want to share our love of the classics with you. We hope to inspire you to read along with us and join in the conversation. I'm Laura.
And I'm Amity. Let's get started.
All right. We're like deep into Far From the Madding Crowd.
Yes. In the thick of it, where it just gets so good and so fun. And I love it. Love discussing it. So just as a recap from before. So in our last episode, we found out that Bathsheba was a little jealous of the fact that Mr. Boldwood was not paying any attention to her. And the way she resolved that was by sending a Valentine. And that sets off all kinds of things into fun motion. And that really was kind of the bulk of what we talked about. And she sends this Valentine to Mr. Boldwood, and there's a whole bunch of consequences that follow. He's suddenly like, oh, he notices her, and then he starts pursuing her, and he's like consumed by thoughts of her, and he even proposes to her. So, and she's also like, she gets advice from Gabriel, and he kind of lets her know, like, your behavior was beneath you. This was not a good thing to do.
So, yeah, she goes from him not paying any attention to her to she sends him a Valentine, and now she's like flipped the switch and he's
in hot pursuit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
she's going, what did I do?
Oops.
Yeah.
And then you've got, Gabriel, who's just her friend and tells her like it is. Anyways, and then coming up, we're going to see more of Sergeant Troy. So.
A lot more. We're going to learn so much about him. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so chapter 21, Troubles in the Fold and a Message. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like dry, but I don't know. You're going to know exactly what's going to happen.
Also really funny. Yep.
Yes. So it's Sunday afternoon, and Bathsheba is told that some of her sheep have broken into the field of clover, and they've eaten it, right? And that's bad for them. So what they have to do is get pierced in the side to they're probably bloated. So they need to release the gas or they will die. Or gas, or I'm not a shepherd, so I don't know, but they need to be pierced.
It sounds like, but yeah.
Or maybe it's liquid. I don't know, but and they have to be pierced in exactly the right spot or they will also die. Mm-hmm. So it has to be like 1 inch one way or the other way, then it won't work either, right? They're all laying down and foaming at the mouth, like in the field. And Labantal comes in and says that tells her they can only be cured with this piercing, but it has to be just the right place. And poor Grass says, well, Gabriel's the only one that can do this. Of course, because she just sent him away. And she tells him, don't mention him in front of her. Mm-hmm. But then she says, but you need to go find somebody that can do this task for me. But don't mention him. Gabriel is again called in as this calm man that knows what to do, just like he was in the fire. He's take charge. I know exactly what to do, even though she had just sent him away. They have one sheep that dies, and she's getting more and more worried, and she's getting less and less against calling Gabriel.
Mm-hmm. It's looking better, especially I think after that first one dies, because it's pretty. Yeah. I think it would be pretty disturbing because it leaped up into the air and then it just fell down dead. And
yeah,
just kind of.
She's like, nasty. I might have to reconsider here. So she finally tells Laban to go get Gabriel, and he comes back and says you have to come ask him yourself. Of course. I just love it.
I know.
As if we're not
And good for
time
you,
constrained,
Gabriel. I know.
right? Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, good for you. Yeah, come and beg me. She has to go ask him herself, or he's not going to come. And then another sheep dies. And so Bathsheba cries, and then she writes a note to him that says, "Do not desert me, Gabriel." She blushes, and then she folds it up. And they're both being prideful. Like, I'm not going to give in. But in the end, she's forced to beg him to come, just like he had begged her to marry him in the beginning. So
Yeah.
I like that. So 15 minutes later, he comes. She's very grateful, but she yells at him for being unkind and not coming, maybe right when she calls. But so he saves 57 of the sheep and only 4 die. And then she asks him if he'll stay and keep working for her. And I think she realizes that she needs him.
I love this because he comes and he just seems like, it says he was just neutral. And like you say, she's like, "How could you be so unkind?" And he murmurs a confused reply and hastened on. She knew from the look which sentence in her note had brought him. "Do not desert me, Gabriel." We're continuing our discussion of Far from the Madding Crowd. Last time we ended at the end of chapter 21. And so we're going to pick up today with chapter 22. We love to talk about the titles, or at least name the titles, because they're so great. They're like this great little kind of humorous synopsis of what the chapter is about. And so the title is The Great Barn and the Sheep Shearers. And so I love the opening quote of this one. And I find that a lot of the chapters open with these kind of profound, sometimes hilarious, very insightful quotes. So he says, quotes right from Thomas Hardy. Of course, he's not quoting somebody else. He said, "Men thin away to insignificance and oblivion quite as often by not making the most of good spirits when they have them, as by lacking good spirits when they are indispensable." And so, I mean, basically, what he's saying is when you're in good spirits, you need to make the most of it. Otherwise, he says you thin away to nothing. And it's kind of like every aspect of our life. When we don't take advantage of the talents we have or the gifts we have, they thin away to nothing. Like, you don't use it, you lose it. And that's kind of a simple way of explaining kind of what he's talking about there.
Kind of like having gratitude for when things are good. I don't know.
Yeah. When things are good, like stopping to recognize that things are good. And then also we've talked about how Thomas Hardy, he seems to be pretty anti-organized religion. He doesn't seem to have a whole lot of respect for that. The particular sects that he was probably in contact with during his life, they were not, I think that he found them to be lacking and quite hypocritical. That's kind of the idea that I get. But I do believe that he wholeheartedly believed in God. And one of the reasons I believe that is because of his very intense descriptions of nature. And I bring that up now because right here near the beginning of this chapter, he is talking about the landscape and how beautiful everything looks. And he says, God was palpably present in the country. And I love that. And what a way of noting that God's handiwork is gorgeous and a testimony of his artistry.
I love this. And the devil had gone with the world to town.
I know. And I think that kind of does come back to what the title of the book, Far from the Madding Crowd. And if you look up the word madding, in fact, I remember when I was in, I think a senior in high school, I had this most amazing English teacher for AP English. And she loved this book too. And she talked about how madding could also be replaced with just maddening, and which means like raucous. And I mean, it's really directly referring to the craziness of city life. And so here they are far out in the country and just away from all that. Anyway, it describes the wonderful barn that Bathsheba owns, the barn there on Weatherbury. And again, this jumps into this idea that they are far from the madding crowd, far from the cities. It talks about how out here in the country, their sense of time is very different from that in the city. It talks about how in London, 20 or 30 years ago are old times. In Paris, 10 or 5 years are like old times. That's like, that's already outdated if it's 5 or 10 years old. Out in the country, in Weatherbury or in, Casterbridge, that the county that they're in, whatever, 5 decades hardly modify the cut of a gaiter, the embroidery of a smock frock by the breadth of a hair. So, and then 10 generations, so 100 years fail to alter the turn of a single phrase. So they just kind of march to the beat of their own timetable, their own drum. You maybe would say that they were behind the times of the city, but they are completely happy with the slow pace of their life.
Mhm.
And it says that the barn totally reflects that. It's this very old, like 400-year-old barn, but it's doing just fine. Anyway, that's like a huge introduction. Basically, they are doing the sheep shearing that day. And Bathsheba is walking around and she's like, watching everybody. So we come to understand that Gabriel is very capable at sheep shearing, just like he's capable at like everything else. And in fact, she like times him. And she's like 23 and a half minutes on that one. But it's really interesting too that, everybody's out there sheep shearing, but Bathsheba's kind of like following Gabriel around. And it talks about how she's very loquacious. She's sort of talking nonstop. And
Yeah, I wrote down she's talking about nothing.
yeah.
She's following him.
And that's what he says. He says there is a loquacity that tells nothing, which was Bathsheba's, and there is a silence which says much. That was Gabriel's. It did make me go, okay, so she's like following around. She like obviously enjoys his company, whether she wants to admit it or not, but she feels like she has to fill the silence with something.
This is like me and my husband. Just saying.
Hey, I wanted to ask, like, is there a time when you have felt like you had to just fill the space with chatter, even if it's like meaningless? Or do you know people who just like fill the space with nothing? Like with, they're saying a lot, but they're not really saying anything.
Well, it's just funny because like with my husband and I, he's very quiet. And so he's not always quiet around me, but he's sometimes is. And so sometimes I'm like, we go on dates and I'm like talking away and he's fine with just not talking. And I'm like, I don't know. It's just how we are.
Yeah.
Which is just kind of funny. And sometimes he talks a lot too. So I'm trying to think. I mean, there are people that I know that like to hear themselves talk.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not really saying much.
For sure. And I was like, okay, I don't want to be one of those people. I will say though that like there is a person in my life that they're just a really quiet person and they don't have a lot to say. And so they will sometimes call me and there's just like silence. And I'm like, well, you called. What do you want to talk about? And so I find myself just like chattering about nothing. And I feel like a complete fool. I'm like, what am I even saying right now? Like, I don't know. So just feeling the silence because it's like super awkward and you're like, I don't know what to say.
I think when other people are silent, I talk and I say really dumb things. Because I'm uncomfortable and I'm like, somebody's got to break the silence. Well, what I just said was really dumb, but yeah. I like make a fool of myself.
Well, and it's almost not fair because we're just like trying to make them feel comfortable. And maybe that's like what Bathsheba is doing because Gabriel is extremely confident and he just doesn't feel like he needs to say anything. Yeah. He's just going about his work. And I remember reading this very short quote a long time ago, and it just said, confidence is quiet. And it's true. When you are truly confident, you don't need to say a whole lot. You go about your work, go about what you're doing, and you don't need to give people a play-by-play. You don't need to try to prove yourself through being very loquacious. You just do what needs to be done.
I wrote down that Gabriel likes that she's watching him.
Oh, of course he does.
But he doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
He's quiet about it.
But then Boldwood shows up. And it becomes very apparent, like Bathsheba disappears. She's going to go out on a ride with him. And Gabriel immediately just gets sad. And he does something that he never does. He nicks the sheep as he's shearing it, and it starts bleeding. And Bathsheba gets after him. And he's like, she knows exactly why I nicked the sheep. She knows that I'm upset. But anyway, so Bathsheba and Boldwood go off. Everyone's like, oh yeah, they're going to be married very soon. And also we come across the fact it's very kind of buried in there, but Bathsheba has installed Gabriel as the bailiff. Mm-hmm. So she had kind of been adamant, I'm going to be my own bailiff. I'm not going to hire anybody else. But Gabriel is her bailiff. So again, she trusts him. She has confidence in him. She actually really enjoys his company.
Of the three suitors, this is he's the one that she's forming an actual friendship with. And so much trust, just foundational, deep trust. So jumping into chapter 23, and I'm going to have to look and see what the title of that chapter is. It's Eventide. 23, Eventide, a second declaration. Okay. So this one is really kind of cute. So they're having a sheep shearing supper. And so it's sort of they've all worked so hard and now they're going to have a big feast. And I was wondering if you've ever done anything like that, because it made me think of when I was probably 12, we went to Montana and did branding with my uncle. So we branded their cows. And that was a big deal, kind of like the sheep shearing. You call all the ranchers from all around and they would gather and they all just help each other with the branding because it's such a huge job. And of course, they all know how to do it. So whoever's ranch they go to, the ranch wife, my aunt in this case, she made massive amounts of just amazing food. And that's kind of there's something there's some people who might look at it and be like, oh, that's so sexist, whatever, because the wife is in there cooking food. And it's oh, well, that's just what they did. So she mashed potatoes for days, a million pies. We all worked hard doing branding all day. And then we went and just ate and stuffed our faces. So that's what this kind of reminded me of. Yeah. I just think of funerals. When we make dinners for,
That's true. Well, that's true. Yeah.
Feed an army.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So Bathsheba is there. She's sort of the hostess and she's like, Gabriel, come sit by me. And he's like, all right. Then Boldwood shows up and she's like, Gabriel, move so Boldwood can sit here. I was like, what are you doing? Except playing games with his heart. So mean.
Yeah. She's so immature. And
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I read that, I was like, are you kidding me?
I know. Yeah.
Move. Exactly. Can you move so this other guy can come sit here?
Yeah. Everybody sort of does this singing performance. And when I just think all their details are so hilarious. Joseph Poorgrass is singing and this guy, Bob Coggin, he starts laughing at him because his singing is so horrible. And so Bob Coggin is excused or you need to leave because you can't be mean. And then Bathsheba, everybody wants her to sing. So she gets up and sings, but she wants Gabriel to accompany her on the flute. So again, here she is. She's like, oh, you come accompany me. And then Boldwood starts singing with her.
So about weird. A winning soldier with a winning tongue seeking his bride.
A little bit of foreshadowing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. And of course, Gabriel notices that Boldwood is like paying so much attention to Bathsheba during the singing and things. The next little thing that is really, really funny is, so Pennyways is there now. Just as a reminder, Pennyways used to be the bailiff. He was fired because it was found out that he had been stealing from Bathsheba. Now, but he was there. He was probably helping with the shearing, and he's there at the dinner. And this part is so funny because Jan Coggin and Joseph Poorgrass congratulate him for not stealing anything. They're like, good job. Everything's still here. Thanks for doing this. And I was thinking about this. I was like, okay, another writer could have written that and we would have been like, oh, that's kind of cheesy. But I think it's the difference between like a really good comedian and just your everyday person like me, who like I could say something and it's not funny, but a comedian could say the same thing. And it's all about the way that they package it, the way they build up to it, and all their verbiage and everything. And they would say it, and it's just like, you know, bring the house down hilarious. and I really think that that's sort of how Thomas Hardy writes. It's like, it's all about his execution and the way he writes it. It's so funny. And you just have to appreciate the humor. It's really great. And then at the end of the chapter, Boldwood, oh my gosh, again, super bold. And he is just like pushing and pushing Bathsheba until she's like, okay, in like 5 or 6 weeks, I'll probably promise you that I will marry you, you know?
So she says that there.
Yeah.
Because later I got to the point where we'll talk about this later today, but that she's like, he said, you promised me. And she's like, I never promised you, but she did there.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Well, she promises that she will promise him. Yeah. Well, she does say, I don't promise yet. She says, I have every reason to hope that at the end of the 5 or 6 weeks between this time and harvest that you say you're going to be away from home, I shall be able to promise to be your wife. Okay. So she's like, I think in that amount of time, I'll be able to ponder on this and come around to the fact that I can maybe promise to be your wife. So I think that he takes it as like already a promise, you know, I promise to promise to be your wife.
I don't know.
She doesn't want to at all. She feels like she's totally been pushed into it. And he's kind of still making her feel guilty about the Valentine. And she's like, who knew that I would suffer these kind of consequences for that stupid moment? But here
she says, I will try to love you.
Yeah. Like, what kind of torture is she going through?
Yeah.
Horrible.
But he's like, okay, that works for me. He's happy about her.
I love this right here at the end. She was like, she had been awestruck at her past temerity and was struggling to make amends without thinking whether the sin quite deserved the penalty she was schooling herself to pay. Yeah. She was like, why did I ever even think that I wanted to mess with him? Why did I ever think I wanted his attention and was seeking his attention? Like, did that warrant what I'm going through now? I don't think so.
Do I have to marry him to make up for this?
Yeah. Good grief.
There are so many words in this book that I don't know.
I know.
So one, and other people may listen to this and go, I can't believe you don't know that word, but temerity, which I that's not a word I've never heard of, but like I've never looked it up. Excessive confidence or boldness. And later I wrote down like how it was used, and I don't have that here, and then the other one is hermetically, in a way that is completely airtight. I wish I would have. I'll have to cut that out.
So temerity, like she talked about, like she couldn't believe how basically boldly she sent that Valentine and sought his attention before. So there's the context for that. That makes perfect sense.
Okay, so we're on chapter 24.
Okay, 24. The same night, the fir plantation. Huge game changer in this chapter. And first of all, we start out Bathsheba. She is going to take a walk around her plantation. She sort of does this like nightly walk to check on things and make sure it's okay. And well, she doesn't always do it, but she wanted to tonight. And Hardy inserts this little piece of philosophy. He says, women are never tired of bewailing men's fickleness in love, but they only seem to snub his constancy. And I was like, modern feminists may look at that and be like, how dare you say that? But it's so true. And I'm sure that like, it's kind of the same thing for men also, but it really is true. And I was thinking about how you said that one of your daughters will really like a guy until he likes her back. It's like, ew, I don't like you anymore.
The thrill of the chase is gone.
The thrill of the chase. Yeah. And we can like talk for hours about how guys will like this girl for a minute and then like another girl and like another girl. And we're like, oh, can't even believe that. That's so dumb. But if he decides to like us forever and ever and ever, we're like, oh, he just needs to move on. Like, this is so annoying. So,
yeah,
it's true. Okay. So she's walking along the plantation and all of a sudden she notices there's somebody else walking along the path and she's kind of nervous, but she's like, well, this is a public road, so whatever, it's fine. But her skirt gets tangled up with this guy's spur and her lantern flickers up or whatever. She sees him and it says his sudden appearance was to darkness what the sound of a trump is to silence. It was like, there he is. And he's this very handsome soldier. And we find out that it is Sergeant Troy. And he, from the very beginning, he is just like this flatterer. Just flattery is it's his weapon, really. Like it's what he uses to bring down everybody, especially women. You can tell he's like way too practiced. And I think that Bathsheba is very wary of that from the start, but she begins to cave.
She's blind.
Oh, yeah. She's like, oh, this guy really likes me. And I really like all these compliments. Like one of the first things he says to her is, thank you for the sight of such a beautiful face, and he just like, you have to give him some credit. Like he's very witty and, in like Pride and Prejudice, there's Mr. Collins, the guy who's like a priest and he's trying to win Elizabeth and all these other ladies, whatever. And he talks about practicing flattery and things that will charm women, but he's so awkward about it. But this guy, he seems to be like right off the cuff. Like he definitely is practiced in flattering people, but I don't know that he necessarily practices his particular phrases. I mean, like I said, you got to give him credit. He's really good. Thomas Hardy is really good. But
I was thinking it must have been really, really dark for her to like not notice that he was there until their clothes got kind of wrapped up in each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds to me like, they're surrounded by trees and it makes me think of the Oregon forests, like at night, those things are so dark. Yeah. So he's just compliment after compliment. And she, she sort of like rebuffs him at first, but she does sort of start to break down a little bit. And so finally, when he does finally leave, she runs home to Liddy and is like, tell me about this guy. And Liddy says he's a doctor's son by name and an earl's son by nature. And Liddy does know some things about him, but she doesn't know how interested Bathsheba is at this point. And so she doesn't say a whole lot. The chapter kind of ends, though, with talking about how really that flattery is getting to Bathsheba. And it says, it is a pity that Boldwood had never once told her she was beautiful. It's like, oh man. So flattery is not good, but women do like to be told they're beautiful.
I know, that's what's sad. It's like, I mean, there's nothing behind it, what he's doing or saying. It's just,
no.
But she's like eating it up. She's like, yeah, he's telling me I'm beautiful. And yeah. And it was funny that Liddy says that he thinks that his education was wasted because he became a soldier.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And that he is a ruin to honest girls.
Yeah. And like, why would that not be a huge red flag?
Right.
Right?
It's like it's just blind to everything that could suggest that maybe he's not good for her, right? I
Yeah.
mean, she just like ignores all the things that the other people are saying or that she's seen. And I think it's interesting that the author is like trying to show us how bad he is,
Mhm.
but yet she doesn't see it at all.
Yeah.
It's
But
just
have
funny.
you ever known, I mean, again, like one of the amazing things about classics is it's like this person, the author is this person who has observed human nature so carefully. And then they're writing about it,
Mhm.
sort of like a warning, sort of like, I think for Thomas Hardy, especially, I think there's a lot of warnings in his writing. And it gives us this insight. So, I mean, because like there's a lot of people this way. Do you know anybody in particular who's kind of been taken in by this and ends up with rough relationships?
Oh yeah, think about like, a woman that marries a really good looking smooth talker. I don't know. Yeah, that happens.
Yeah,
You got to be
totally.
careful. The I don't know, the charmers, the flirts. I don't know. They're just kind of funny. I
Yeah.
can't think of anybody like specific, but yeah, I wouldn't want to marry anybody too good looking or too suave. I'd be worried all the time.
I know. I know. You
Not
kind
that
of
my
go,
husband isn't those things.
but first of all, good looks are so temporary anyway.
That's true.
And
true.
a lot of times they really are used to the benefit of the person who has them to charm people and do not nice
Yeah, and
things.
then like, I mean, and when you have good looks, you won't always have them.
Yeah.
And so when you rely on that, what's going to happen when that goes away?
Mhm.
Or
Yeah.
or you may be good looking and not know it. So it doesn't do you any good anyways.
And it also doesn't do you any harm. So that's fine.
I always say, like, wouldn't it be nice to just be one of those? I don't know. I don't know if it would be nice, but wouldn't it be, wouldn't it be nice to be like so good looking that you could just like get whatever you want,
Just
maybe.
waltz in places and people treat you differently.
But then do people like you for you? You know what I mean? Then you might question, are they just acting like this because of how I look? Or is it, you know what I mean? They may think that there's something wrong with them internally.
Yeah. Well, I've always wondered that as like people that are extremely wealthy or people that are extremely
Yes.
good looking, like it's got to be so hard for them to really find somebody that truly loves them for them.
Mhm.
And how much have they really worked on themselves, like developing their personality and developing their character? Or have they depended on those good looks and that money to get them whatever they want?
Yeah.
So, I
So
don't know.
both sides of like the
Interesting.
relationship could be insecure. Like,
Yeah. Oh,
they
absolutely.
might wonder, does she actually love me? Or,
Mhm.
yeah. So interesting thought. Okay, so chapter 25, the new acquaintance described.
Mhm.
So this is like a character sketch of
Mhm.
the third suitor, Bathsheba's third suitor. And he sounds like kind of a good guy, but he manipulates people and he switches back and forth from truth to lying really easily. So, and I mean, I guess he seems like a good guy on the surface to her. But
Yeah, I think it's very surface level that he seems like he knows the things to do to appear like a good person. And I think there's some things that it talks about later that really gives you an idea of that. But yeah, he knows the things to do to make it seem like he's just the best, but underneath there's just nothing.
So the first sentence in this chapter says, idiosyncrasy and vicissitude had combined to stamp Sergeant Troy an exceptional being. Vicissitude is a change of circumstance or fortune, typically one that is unwelcome or unpleasant.
That was kind of interesting. And then idiosyncrasy is a mode of behavior that is weird, different, strange, peculiar.
Yeah, well, and that really speaks to the fact that, I mean, he was born rather high, and then he chose to be a soldier. He was well educated.
Definitely different.
Yeah, so he totally took a different path. And Gabriel has some opinions on that we'll talk about later, but
yeah, he'll voice them.
Yes.
He'll tell us. So, and I like this too. It says that he doesn't think much of the past or the future beyond yesterday or tomorrow, which is interesting.
Very telling. It's all about right now.
And he doesn't have any expectations. And so therefore he's like always happy or content because he's not disappointed. He's just kind of like living moment to moment.
Yeah, but also no goals.
Yes.
You know,
no, it's surface like he's content in the moment, I guess. Okay, so he lies to women, which helps him with his popularity with others, which I thought was kind of interesting. He has vices, but none of them are horrible. They're just little.
I guess it depends on who you ask. I think they get revealed, and I'm like, he hasn't murdered anyone, so that's good. Right. But other than that, pretty much all of his vices are pretty horrible.
But like people will look at him and go, they kind of laugh about it.
Yeah.
Like, he has these problems, but it's not too bad. And they kind of
and it's probably one of those things that it's like, I think we've talked about it before. When you are very attractive, you get away with crap that a person who is not attractive would not get away with. Do you know what I'm saying? So like people totally excuse his behavior because he's so charming and charismatic, and they would not excuse that behavior from somebody less charming.
Yeah. That reminds me of like high school.
Oh,
like
absolutely.
the boys in high school that everybody thought were so good looking and they could do whatever they wanted and nobody cared.
Yeah.
Well, never mind. Specific people, especially specific people who might be famous. Okay.
I don't know. They get talked about a lot anyway.
I know a football player that I went to high school with.
Oh.
Some people will know who I'm talking about. He ended up playing in the NFL. And I was in Spanish with him. I was a freshman, he was a senior, which tells you something. And he worked the Spanish teacher like nothing I have ever seen before. He would walk up to her and he would he was the football star.
Yeah.
Like of the state, right?
Yeah.
And he'd be like, oh, I didn't get my homework done last night. And he would just like saddle up to her and like sweet talk her. And he would get other people in the class to do his homework for him because he could get girls to do anything, which makes me like, that's probably the example I've seen in my life.
I think that's a great example. I could totally see.
So like on one hand, yes, there's these people that are successful in things like sports or acting or whatever, maybe are popular for those reasons, have that advantage, but they also have a total disadvantage because there's no character development. Like what happens when that's gone?
Well, I mean, look at their personal lives. Look no further than their personal lives. Like how many marriages have these people been through? How much drama do they go through? It's like, who wants that?
When they're used to having everything handed to them and like not having to work for anything. I mean, that's anyways. So I just thought it's kind of funny.
Yeah, no, I love that.
Okay, he's always busy, but he doesn't have any direction. We kind of talked about that. He's well educated, especially because he's just a soldier, right? And I love this. He can think about one thing while speaking about another at the same time. That is, wow. It's amazing.
It's really funny.
And then I love this. Oh my gosh, this is such a good character sketch, right? He believes that you either flatter women or curse and swear at them. Nothing in between.
I totally underlined that. I was like, because he says, treat them fairly and you are a lost man. He says, so he has this horrible view of women.
Yes.
And I hate hate the word misogyny. I feel like it's way overused, but I think you could apply it to this guy. I think that it would actually apply in this area because
Yes.
he does not treat women as if they are humans. They're subhuman, really.
He's really fun to talk about. He's so fun.
Well, because you talked about him being able to think one thing and say another. And, but it also, like, again, good part of the character sketch says he could speak of love and think of dinner, call on the husband to look at the wife.
Yeah.
Be eager to pay and intend to owe. Like, just all these contradictions. He's really kind of a horrible dude.
A couple weeks goes by and he comes to help her with the shearing just because he wants to.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he, at the end of the chapter, he just kind of comes into the field and she blushes. She sees him and then blushes. What did I write? This is interesting. It says he's a regrater. Okay, this is how it's used. This treatment had led to his becoming a sort of regrater of other men's gallantries to his own aggrandizement as a Corinthian, rather than to the moral profit of his hearers. So a regrater is somebody who purchases goods from a market, and then resells them at a nearby market at an inflated price.
That's really interesting. So it's basically saying he like sees what other men do to win women, and then he uses it only in like sort of a cheap way. Does that that kind of like
the word gallantries, right?
Yeah.
Sort of regrater of other men's gallantries. So he he watches what other men do and then he just like fakes it, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
He's like, that worked, and I'll use that to my own ends. Or maybe what it's saying is like he sees what people do and he acts like they're his own actions. And because it says he lies like a cretin. So maybe he interesting.
Yeah, you said that quote, treat them fairly and you are a lost man. I love it. Okay. Yeah. So chapter 26, scene on the verge of the hay mead. So this is basically a conversation between Troy and Bathsheba. He calls her the queen of the corn market. And she helps him. He's there to help shearing, right? So she thanks him for helping her. And she does it kind of indifferently, like, oh, thanks for helping me.
Yeah, because she's still trying to act like she doesn't care about all of his advances. But
so she's kind of doing the same thing he is. Like they're both faking it. Like she's trying to act cool and he's like, I love you, but there's nothing really behind it. He says that it's a shame, bad luck should plague a man for telling a woman she's beautiful. And she wants him to leave, but he says he would rather her curses than another woman's kisses. And Bathsheba doesn't know what to say to that. I think that's funny. Like, I'd rather you be around you even though you hate me. Because he's so in love with her, right?
Well, so he says.
Yes. And she says that she can't allow a stranger to be bold and disrespectful to her, and that he shouldn't have said anything. And so he asks her for her forgiveness, and she's like, no. She's flirting. She's playing games with him.
Yeah.
So she started this game with she's playing games with all of them. He says that she must have heard what everyone thinks of her beauty. So she is hearing that other people are talking about her, right? Oh, and he says that her beauty is going to do more harm than good because this is funny. It's going to make other men uncontent with normal women. Okay. This is why I hate women like this. He's right. No.
Because he knows, like, he's totally being disingenuous with her, but he knows what's going to get her. And he knows human nature too.
Yes. If men see you, then they're just going to be like, I can't be happy with any normal woman. I wrote down that Troy is using cleverness and quick wit, which is also smoke and mirrors, to charm her into getting her to be more attracted to him. So he's trying all these tricks to get her to like him. And she's playing his game too. She's flirtatious, but he's better at it.
Yeah.
But she's kind of
he is way more practiced.
Yes.
Obviously, which is just so slimy. So slimy.
Yes. So then Bathsheba asks him what time it is, and Troy looks at his, I love this too. Troy looks at his watch and says, I'm going to give it to you. And he tells her that it was his father's, and she tries to give it back to him, but he won't take it. He kind of backs off. And then he says he loves her more than he loves his father. Another red flag. Hello.
Yeah.
I wrote, proof this guy's nuts.
Yeah, exactly. Like, run for the hills. You've known him less than 24 hours, and he's proclaiming his love and giving you a family heirloom, which you find out later, and maybe you're going to talk about this, he wasn't even actually serious about giving it to her. He says, he's like, well, I wasn't actually going to do that, but the more I think about it, I guess I will. I wasn't really serious about like actually giving it to you. And you're like, what in the world? Can't trust this guy within an arm's reach.
Yeah, I wonder that, because I wrote this down. Like, so she says that's too generous of you. And now he thinks she's more exciting, wild, and more beautiful than ever. And he wonders how he could have been joking about it. So he must have been joking about giving her the watch.
Yeah.
And he agrees to take it back as long as she'll keep talking to him. That's so funny.
Yeah.
And then he leaves and she's like, I don't even know how much of that conversation was even true.
If it's okay, there is a quote back a little ways, which I feel like you could put at the end of the chapter, but he kind of puts it in the middle because he can tell he's making ground. And it says, the careless sergeant smiled within himself, and probably too the devil smiled from a loophole in the Tophet. For the moment was the turning point of a career. Her tone and means signified beyond mistake that the seed which was to lift the foundation had taken root in the chink. The remainder was a mere question of time and natural changes. He's like, I've got her. So evil. So evil.
This is the quote I highlighted. The truth comes out, said the soldier in reply. Never tell me that a young lady can live in a buzz of admiration without knowing something about it. Ah, well, Miss Everdeen, you are, pardon my blunt way, you're rather an injury to our race than otherwise. So like, there's no way you can be this beautiful and not know it.
Yeah.
And you're going to hurt us, men. Okay. So chapter 27, hiding the bees. So now it's late June and everyone is busy with the hay. And so Bathsheba decides that she's going to go hive the bees herself. Troy shows up and says, I'm going to help you. So she tells him to put on a veil and gloves so he can work with the bees. And he says, give me what you're wearing. Like, take it off and give it to me. And so he puts it on and then she laughs at him. And he's holding up the hive and shaking the bees from it. And he says, this makes my arm hurt worse than sword. What does he call it? The sword exercise. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was thinking sword fighting. So right here, like Troy is smarter than Boldwood and Gabriel.
Mm-hmm.
He knows not to come on too strong. Like the other two guys, I guess he asked her to marry him too, but he knows not to come on too strong, and he's charming her little by little so that her feelings are growing slowly.
Yeah. And he like makes suggestions of things. And I think hoping that she will think that things are her idea type thing, because, he mentions the sword exercise, which what does that have to do with bees? Good grief. I mean, he says that it makes his arm more tired than sword exercerce, but like,
well, it's like his way of bragging that he does sword exercise.
Right. Exactly.
Like, you want to watch me?
I know. Exactly. What's sword exercise? I'll show you.
She says, I've never seen it, but I would like to. And so he bends over and whispers something into her ear in a low voice. And I don't think it tells you what he says, but then she blushes. I don't remember, but I don't think so. And she said she's not going to go unless she can bring Liddy with her. And he kind of looks annoyed and says, there's no reason to bring her. And then she's like, okay, I'll come.
Yeah.
I don't need to bring.
Basically, he's like, we're going to go meet in this very secluded part of the wood. And that really bothers me because, which should again be a huge red flag to her, because at this period of time, reputation is everything for a woman. And she knows that, or she should know that. And so, and he knows that too. And so for him to suggest that she should come by herself and be alone with him in this secluded wood, it's very manipulative and abusive, really. And he kind of mocks her for wanting to have some propriety and try to reserve her or conserve her reputation by bringing her friend with her, which is what any self-respecting person would do.
Right.
And if he was a respectful man, he'd be like, oh, of course, but he's not. He's a horrible man.
I mean, it's like, yeah, like he's trying to get her alone. I mean, he has a motive.
Oh,
Gotta get her alone. Yeah. And we'll find out
win her
why.
over.
Yep.
28 is just called The Hollow Amid the Ferns. And that gives you a pretty good description of where they meet up. So Bathsheba heads out to the woods. And it, like I said, it's sort of this, it's a hollow. So it's like sort of down in, so you wouldn't be able to easily see it, you know, from the road or anything. So she goes down and meets him there, and he's already there. And okay, so the first part of it is Troy explaining all the moves and all the technical parts of a sword exercise. And I don't really want to get into that too much. I think, you know, somebody could look that up if they're super interested in it. I was like, okay, let's move on. But
yeah, they're like, he swipes to the left, he swipes to the right, and
yeah,
whatever.
Here's the ones, the twos, the threes, the cuts, the thrusts, the points, the guards, whatever. Yeah. And he's like, hey, I'm going to do this, and you need to make sure that you don't move. She's like, okay, I won't move. And then he thinks he's going to test her. He says, now just to learn whether you have pluck enough to let me do what I wish, I'll give you a preliminary test. And that just really rubbed me the wrong way. I was like, so he's telling her that she has to prove herself, like that he's going to see if she has enough pluck that to let him do what he wants, because that's what would be required. Like, anyway, he's just total show off, total bully, just anyway. So she's like standing still, and he's like flashing his sword all around her very close. And she's like, he does this like preliminary sort of test thing. And she's like, oh my gosh, have you killed me? He's like, no, I haven't even touched you. And then she asks if the sword is sharp. And he says, no, it's not sharp. It's not sharp. So just hold still. And then he proceeds to do this sword play, which the whole idea, it's kind of this very, comes across as, I hope this isn't a horrible thing to say, very sensual. Do you get that idea? Mm-hmm. It just creates this whole mood that's just very close and intimate. And you're like, oh, and at the end of it, his sword ends like right near her shoulder, and he lops off a bit of her hair. And she was like, you've ruined my hair. And you said your sword wasn't sharp. He's like, oh, this thing would skin you alive. You know, it would like skin you like super easy. And she's like, you said it wasn't sharp. And he was like, well, I had to tell you that so that you wouldn't move. And I'm like, again, he's lying and lying and lying. Like, give it whatever excuses you want. Can't lie like that. Super manipulative. But she totally falls for it. He like gets really close to her, and then he runs away, and you find out that he has kissed her. And that sort of ends that chapter.
He's showing off to her, totally. But like we as the readers can totally see what his flaws are. but she's
Yeah.
just like, and like, you're right. Like he flicks a caterpillar off her chest. I mean, he's like, it's too intimate
Very.
for what's appropriate for that day.
Yeah.
And then I think I even read that, I mean, he should not have kissed her.
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's something that just didn't happen. And I think it's interesting later that Boldwood is kind of incensed that Troy has kissed her. Like that's which is super interesting too, because people go around kissing each other all the time. It even talks about how like Liddy kisses Bathsheba on the lips. Like this is how people were, which is very foreign to us, but it's a different time. But for a man to do that, it was like taking advantage of her. And he should have, first of all, they should never have been in that situation. And he should have asked permission, and there's just all kinds of propriety that was completely just thrown aside. So yeah, not a gentleman, not a good guy. Chapter 29, the title is Particulars of a Twilight Walk. Like I said, it's always so interesting to see the way that Thomas Hardy chooses to open these chapters. I think they're always interesting. So there's this part near the beginning of the chapter. It says, Bathsheba loved Troy in the way that only self-reliant women love when they abandon their self-reliance. It's like, it's like she's been so independent, and yet she's never had training in how to deal with relationships like this. And so she's just like head over heels. She throws caution to the wind, and she just doesn't know how to deal with this. So he says, when a strong woman recklessly throws away her strength, she is worse than a weak woman who has never had any strength to throw away. One source of her inadequacy is the novelty of the occasion. She's never experienced something like this before. And so I don't think she knows how to apply her strength, because it's not like she just doesn't have any of her intelligence or her spunkiness or anything anymore. She just doesn't know how to apply it. She has never had practice in making the best of such a condition. Weakness is doubly weak by being new. So I think that's like, it's such a tremendous insight for people in general, definitely not just women, but that's just how we are when we come across a new circumstance. It's like kind of we fumble around for a little while and we feel kind of like a fool for a bit. Not that we suddenly have lost our intelligence or anything else. It's a new situation. And so we're figuring it out. And that's
kind of
how
have
she
to
is.
Get your grounding or whatever, which I just think that's funny that she's a self-reliant woman, and he says that she abandons her self-reliance, and I don't know, like later on, Troy is actually the one depending on her.
Oh, absolutely.
So how did she abandon her self-reliance? Like,
well, she comes to herself, and I think that we'll see that. But for right now, she's just in kind of the twilight zone. She's just starry-eyed and schoolgirlish, and so she's a very capable farmer, intelligent, educated, deals well with so many things. And this thing, she is fumbling, and
yes, like being in love
has
with
no
him
guidance or help.
Being in love with him kind of made her strength disappear.
She is Samson and he's Delilah, and her hair. So isn't that kind of interesting? I don't know if Thomas Hardy thought about it at all, but remember how Samson's strength left when his hair was cut, right?
Yeah.
And Troy comes in there and like whacks off a little bit of her hair, and it's like, there goes her strength.
Yeah. Well, it's totally true though. When you're in love, it's like when you're first in love and you're Twitter-pated or infatuated or whatever, it's like, you can't think, you can't eat, you can't function.
There's no rational thought. Yeah. And I remember I can't even remember who it was who talked about when you find yourself in love, like the best thing that you can do is surround yourself with people that are rational and that can give you rational insight. And you kind of have to plan ahead of time to actually listen to them, you know? And
Can't really
because
trust your own judgment.
you really can't. Like, no. So anyway, so it kind of like philosophizes on this for a while. And I think that this is so beautifully put. He says, Troy's deformities lay deep down from a woman's vision. We talked about this before, right? Like, he's kind of the worst, but he knows how to hide all of his vices at first, whilst his embellishments were upon the very surface. So everybody looks at him and thinks, oh my gosh, he's just the best. He's so handsome. He's so charming. He's charismatic. He can do sword exercises and whatever. But deep down, he's just garbage. Thus contrasting with homely Oak, whose defects were patent to the blindest and whose virtues were as metals in a mine. So his virtues are priceless. He really is the best of the best. But all those things, you have to like get to know him, because it's not surface level, right? Yeah. There is depth to him. It does, but he's not necessarily a lot to look at on the surface. And he's very quiet, and he doesn't try to flaunt any of his virtues. So
yeah, with those quiet ones, you have to get to know them,
yeah,
which a lot of times they have more qualities than the charming,
absolutely.
good-looking. Yeah. I had that quote highlighted.
Yeah.
Too. That's funny.
So another thought that I had when I was thinking about this and writing out my outline was how, again, kind of going back to the title, far from the madding crowd, far from the riotousness and the busyness and all the glitz and glamour, that's where Oak's traits are. They are far from view, and which is not to say that he doesn't do anything good. Like, he's doing good constantly, but people actually have to stop. They have to slow down and notice, because he's not flashy and he's not trying to put himself forward. His behavior is far from the madding crowd. She's out walking, and Gabriel actually comes across her, and he decides that he's going to be bold and he's going to talk to her about this infatuation that she has with Troy.
One thing, so yeah, she's gonna go look, or he's gonna go have a conversation with her, which is hilarious. But
yes, okay,
Gabriel isn't, like, we've noticed that he's not portrayed as somebody who's perfect, but his faults are better than Troy, who's like two-sided.
Yeah, at least he's honest.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So he says to her, I wish you'd never met this Sergeant Troy, and she's like, why? He's like, he is not good enough for you. And she's like, did anyone tell you to say that to me? Which is so not fair to him. It's like, well, no, of course not, And she's like, well, he's definitely good enough for me. He's educated, he's well-born. And I love what he says. He's like, his being higher in learning and birth than the ruckus soldiers is anything but proof of his worth. It shows his course to be downward. And I don't know exactly what the general perception of soldiers was, but it seems that it was maybe not the very best. In all the Jane Austen books, the girls are always obsessed with the soldiers, especially Pride and Prejudice. They're not like the classiest members of society. And to Gabriel, who is a very hardworking farmer, to him, to see a high-born, well-educated man decide to be a soldier, that's a downward trend. That's not speaking to his good qualities at all. But he even says, he's like, I do like soldiers. It's nothing necessarily against them, but I don't like this guy. And he also kind of tries to leverage like her promise to Boldwood, because everybody has this perception that Boldwood and Bathsheba are going to get married. So he's like, well, you made a promise to Boldwood, like what are you doing, basically? And she's like, I've never made a promise. And then she finds herself just defending Troy to the hilts. And I think that's another red flag. Like if you feel like you barely even know somebody and everybody's telling you, no, this is a bad guy, and you're just having to defend, that's probably not a good position to be in. But so a thought that I had though, too, is it seems like maybe you've had this experience. Don't guys they just know when another guy is no good, you know? And they won't necessarily say anything about it unless you ask them. But I remember like when I was in high school, there was this guy that he made it known that he liked me, and so I decided that I liked him, whatever. And then he was just became a total jerk or whatever, and I was like, okay, never mind, hurt my feelings. And all these other guys were like, well, yeah, he's that way, and we could have told you that, you know? And I was like, well, why didn't you, first of all?
Yeah.
And how do they, like, they just know? I don't know. They have weird locker room conversations or something.
Well, I think girls
But
know too, but we tell.
that's probably true. That's
It's
probably
like
true.
you'll see a guy that, I mean, that would happen to me all the time. I'd have a friend that would like a girl and I'd be like, what do you see in her?
Mm,
Like, she's
mm,
awful. I don't get it. And I'd say it, but that
mhm.
didn't ever help because it's
Because
like
guys don't
Bathsheba
care.
with Troy.
Yeah, yeah,
Blind.
yeah. And maybe that's what guys figure too. It's like there's no point in saying anything. And also, they always have this weird bro code too that I just never understand. So, whatever. Okay.
One thing I love is like, she's trying to defend Troy and she says that he sneaks into the back of the church at the end. And so nobody really knows he's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
She's like,
just
he
cracked me up.
goes to church. He does.
Nobody sees him, but he goes.
But yeah, he just sneaks in the back because that's the way he does it. And then she just like the more Gabriel pushes, the more she gets defensive. And then she reverts to her former tactic of like, well, you just need to leave. You need to leave my farm. And he like immediately calls her bluff and he's like, sure. Because that worked before, didn't it? And she kind of backtracks. It was really funny.
Yeah,
Now,
I wrote that she tells Gabriel to leave the farm for the second time, but she's pretending. She doesn't really mean it.
yeah. So at the end of this chapter, you had brought up how Bathsheba was like, oh, Troy goes to church every Sunday. He's good. And so just kind of on the way home, I just think it's so funny. Gabriel stops at the church and he goes the way that Bathsheba says that Troy goes. And it's like overgrown with stuff. And he's like, nope, nobody's been this way in a really long time. So he's lying. And yeah, so I thought that was really kind of funny. And it also kind of makes your heart sink a little bit because you're like, oh, she totally believes it. And
Yeah,
it's totally
I
lying.
totally missed that. I'll have to go back and read.
It's at the very end of chapter 29, and it's one of those things that you just have to like very carefully read to be like, oh, this is what he's doing. Okay. So
Yeah,
then
he says, this is one thing I thought was funny though. He says he'll stay because, a woman couldn't possibly run a farm. So he says he'll stay. And then Bathsheba's thankful, but she says, leave me alone as a woman, but not as a mistress. So she wants to like have a professional relationship with him.
That's a really good point. It's like that's her way of saying, I don't want your opinions anymore. Right? Just give me your hard work.
Yeah.
And that's where our relationship stops. Which is funny because we're going to see that like down the road, that's totally not actually the kind of relationship she wants at all. Because she needs somebody. She needs a confidant. And she doesn't like, she has Lydia and Marianne, but they're kind of silly girls that with not much worldly wisdom. And so she needs somebody who's steady and wise. And anyway, she has a hard time finding it. Chapter 30. its hot cheeks and tearful eyes. So Bathsheba immediately goes home after her walk with Gabriel, and she is more determined than ever. Oh, and we discover that somehow Troy had caught up with her and he walked her home and then he kissed her again. This is a big deal. And so that strengthens her resolve. She gets home, she sits down immediately and writes a letter to Boldwood saying, basically, it's not going to happen, pal. Like, we're not going to get married. And then she gets up from that. She goes to another part of her house and she overhears the ladies in her house talking, Marianne, Liddy. And she realizes they're talking about her and about Troy. And so she comes up on them and she's like, who are you talking about? Oh, yeah, I know you're talking about me. And she's like, no, I hate Troy. And they're like, oh, yeah, he's no good. And she's like, don't talk that way about him. No one should hate him. And then Liddy and Bathsheba go off and Bathsheba's like, she's like, Liddy, are you such a simpleton? Can't you read riddles? Can't you see? Are you a woman yourself? And she's like, oh my gosh, she's so back and forth. She's like, I hate him. You shouldn't hate him. He's horrible. I love him. And then she's like, Liddy, can't you tell that I love him? Well, obviously, you know. So I just wrote down, she's so passionate that she has lost all common sense.
Yes.
All rationality. And that's why I really believe that a piece of wisdom is to bridle your passions. You cannot make good decisions when you are so passionate about anything.
Yeah.
Really. Your rationality flies out the door.
Yeah, I love it. It's like she just can't decide how she feels. I mean, I think she knows how she feels about him, but she can't decide how much she wants to admit. But then when they say stuff, she defends him.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever says anything about him, she defends him.
Yeah. And here's a really telling thing too. She says to like I said, Liddy and Marianne are not necessarily worldly wise, but it's always, you know, the people of the town talk, and Liddy and Marianne are very privy to the goings on. And so they hear things, right? So Liddy knows lots of things. And so Bathsheba takes her aside and she says, solemnly swear to me that he's not a fast man, that it is all lies they say about him. And poor Liddy is like, I swear that it's all like, what am I supposed to say? You know? And Bathsheba is just desperately trying to convince herself is the truth. She's like, how can I say he is not? And Bathsheba says, you graceless girl, how can you have the cruel heart to repeat what they say? Unfeeling thing that you are, but I'll see if you or anybody else in the village or town either dare to do such a thing. It's like she wants to force everybody to think well of Troy. And if she can do that, then he must be a redeemable character. You know?
Yeah.
She knows he's not. She knows it. And Liddy, even at this point, is like, I think I just need to leave. I don't think I can be here anymore because this is a super toxic environment. It's horrible. And Bathsheba backtracks, whatever. Anyway, Bathsheba has gotten to this point where she is pushing people away. She's ruining relationships. She's trying to, what is the term, fit a round peg into a square hole. It's not working. And yeah, so that's kind of where this part ends. And
yeah, I like that. I don't know how she says it. Liddy says that Bathsheba would be, is there a quote there that would be a match for any man?
Yeah.
And Liddy kind of is like, I don't deserve to be yelled at here. I'm leaving.
Right.
This
yeah.
I don't need
to be bullied. Yeah. Because Bathsheba has turned into a total bully. And Liddy's like, I think that she sees the extreme contrast in her mistress and is like, there's something seriously wrong with you. And I don't need to put up with this anymore.
Yeah. And she's, and also she's like, Bathsheba's like, but you're my friend. You're not my servant. But so they're just kind of having this back and forth,
Yeah.
And she's like, I would, if I was Lydia, I'd be like, well, you're not acting like you're my friend. You're kind of acting like telling me what to say and think, and not
Yeah.
letting me have my own.
You're being a mean girl.
Yes. Okay, so that brings us to the end of chapter
30.
Thank you.
Yep. End of chapter 30. And so many amazing things happen and kind of
Yes.
disgusting things. You're like, Bathsheba, what are you doing? But
well, the interesting thing is for the next 2 weeks, we're not going to be talking about this book.
okay, so next week we're going to have just such a beautiful and sweet Christmas book that we're going to be talking about and discussing, as well as talking about a few of our very favorite Christmas books. So just to give some fun Christmas recommendations there. And then the following week, we have another bonus episode.
Yeah, we're going to talk about our top 10 books of the year. Most of these won't be classics, so and we left out the books that we've covered. So it's going to be all new stuff, but give you an idea of the other kind of stuff we read and what we like. Maybe give you some ideas for something you might want to read. And then we talk about our reading goals for next year.
Yeah.
So that was a fun one.
Yes. Super fun. So our favorites of 2022 and our goals for 2023. And overall, our goals are like read more. So it's fun. But
read more, but slower.
Yes. Yeah. That is the moral.
Yes.
So what have you been reading this week?
I have been reading Once Upon a Wardrobe by Patty Callahan. And it's just the most delightful, wonderful book to read this time of year.
Oh, awesome.
Wintry. So it's about a little boy named George who is 10 years old and he has a terminal illness. And he's stuck at home, can't go anywhere. And he discovers The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or the Chronicles of Narnia series. And he's obsessed with it. And so he has this older sister who goes to school at Oxford, and she comes home on the weekends occasionally. And so she's kind of in and out. And she goes and finds C.S. Lewis at Oxford. And because the little boy wants to know where this idea came from, like what made him think of this story. And so she goes and meets with C.S. Lewis at his house with his brother and goes on walks with him. And he tells her his life story, basically. And so then she comes back and tells her brother. It's the sweetest.
That is so sweet. Oh, okay. I'm going to have to find it. That's super fun.
It has been fun to read. And I'm reading it. So like with my eyes.
Awesome. Very good. Okay. So I just started a book called The Merchant and the Rogue. And it's by Sarah M. Eden. And I've talked about another book by her. It's kind of this series because everybody in it sort of like knows each other and is interconnected. So it's about this society called the Dread Penny Society, and they're all writers. And there are these people that write stories and put their installments in the magazines because it's sort of, I'm not totally sure which period it is, if it's more like Regency era or if it's more Victorian. I'm not totally clear on that. But anyway, it's London in the 1800s at some point. And so this particular one is about an Irish guy named Brogan Donnelly, which is quite the name. And he has been asked by the Dread Master, the guy who's like the head of the Dread Penny Society, to withdraw himself from the society and sort of go undercover and go after somebody, go find out who is like committing these crimes, basically, and stealing from this wax museum, among other things. So that's what he does. And he meets up with this girl who was actually born in Russia, and she owns this little print shop, and he goes to work for her father and her. And of course, it's going to inevitably have some romance. And anyway, but it's just kind of fun. Like,
How did you hear about it?
I think honestly, I was like desperate for a book to listen to because everything was on hold. And so I was like looking through Libby to find something, and I came across it was like highly recommended, and like all of the ones in the series were on hold. And I was like, that usually means like it's probably pretty good. But I found one that it was only like a 3-week wait as opposed to a 20-week wait. And so I was like, all right, I'll try this. And it was really fun. It was really good. So this one, I'd had this one on hold because I think it was like the highest recommended one. And so I had this one on hold, and it finally came available, and it's been months. So
Yeah. Do you have to read them in order?
I don't think so.
That's good.
I hope not, because I don't even know what number this is or whatever.
That's
So
awesome. No, it's like, how do you find, I always want to know that. How did you find that book? Did you pick it up at the library and like the cover? Usually I've heard about it from somebody, and that's how I pick books, but
yeah.
Yeah.
I will sometimes just go to the library and browse the shelves, and if something stands out to me, and the cover does have a lot to do with it. There's a lot to be said for an attractive cover, for sure. But
I just ordered Audrey a book have you heard of Blackwell's Books?
Mm-mm.
It's a place where you can order the UK covers, which are often a lot better than the US covers.
Yeah.
And what was it called? Something about animals, and I hope it comes by Christmas.
Join us next week as we discuss A Quiet Little Woman by Louisa May Alcott. If you have suggestions for books we should read and discuss, please email us at thebestbookspodcast@gmail.com. We would love it if you would leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts and share our podcast with your friends. We want to inspire and encourage as many people as we can to read out of the best books.
As Thoreau says, read the best books first, or you may not have a chance to read them at all. See you next week.